In this movie, we're going to look at the creation of the lips. Now, there are a couple of different ways, so we're going to explore a couple. I have here some paths, and you see that the lips and the teeth are separate. So we're going to concentrate on the lips for this movie. I'm going to select the bottom lip, and I have a pink color here, and in a layer, which I'm going to create a layer right here, and we'll call it bottom lip. I'm going to take that path and fill it with the pink. I'm then going to select the upper lip here, and in a layer on top of the bottom lip, I will call it upper lip. And fill that path with that same pink. Now, like I said, there's a couple of ways of creating the textures on the lips. One quick way would be to do something like this. I'm going to create a layer right here on top of this, put it right above the bottom lip, and I'm going to call this layer a texture. Now, these are for lips that have a lot of texture to them, right? So I'm going to go ahead and fill this with a pink. Doesn't matter, as long as we have a color in there. And then I'm going to fill this bottom color here, the background color, with a darker version of that same red. And I'm going to give this a filter of fibers. And fibers is going to go in there and create this kind of a texture. I'm going to bring down the variance a little bit and the strength, so I get these nice little tones like that. And I might want to just blur those just a little bit, so I'll give them a little bit of a motion blur. That's going to go straight up and down. So I'll set this to 90. So they're straight up and down, not so much of a distance, just a little bit, so I just get a little bit of a tugging on it like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and clip it with that bottom lip, just like that. And then I'm going to warp it. So I go in there and say warp it, and I'm going to make it match the angles of these lips. You can see that I'm just kind of bending these guys over and twisting them around until I get this curvature that I see on the lips, like so. And I can really start to emphasize certain areas more than others, just to get that sense of that curve right in there. And we start to get this nice kind of shape like that. And I would then bring down the opacity of that layer just a bit and give it a little layer mask, so I can start to slowly cover up certain parts that I don't want to see as strongly, like right down here along the bottom, and create a texture kind of like that. Or if we want simpler lips, we'll just throw that one completely away. I could do it with my burn tool. Now I'm going to set this up to midtones right now, and I'm going to go in here and just kind of darken certain parts right along the edge of the lips, right through here like that. Now keep in mind, it is good to have a guide of what this stuff looks like, some point of reference, even if it's just looking in the mirror and looking at your own lips, just so you can see how light hits them and where you get little shadows and such. And we'll throw a little shadow right along the bottom of the lip like so. And we'll just darken those areas a little more. And then I could go in there and start to get a smaller brush and maybe bring down the opacity of it to about a 20. And I'll just start drawing little lines right through here like this. Just small lines like so. Now, it doesn't matter if these lines are perfect, because what's going to happen now is I'm going to take my smudge tool, the little finger here, and I'm going to lock the transparency for this layer, and now I'm going to start to shape those. So I'm going to make it a little bigger, and I'm going to start to move these around so I start to get more of a sense of the kind of lines that you actually see on the lips. So they're just pulling out in certain areas, just like so. And I'm pulling out these tones just to start getting that nice little texture on the lips. I can even pull some up from these dark tones down here. So I'm just kind of getting this little texture happening to my lips. Now I can go in there and again with the burn tool and make it a little bigger. I'm going to start adding little tones in certain spots. And I've got the opacity way down so that it's not so strong. I'm just going to start adding a couple of little tones in certain areas. And again, if you have a model of how this looks, it makes it that much easier. Then once we have all these tones in there, we will then go in there and with a dodge tool, I can go in there and start to lighten certain areas. Now I've got the opacity pretty high up on here, so I can just make it really small and just add a couple of little glistenings, just a couple of little sharp lights here and there, just so it has a little moisture to the lips. And I just add a little highlights in certain areas. Then I can make a much larger brush and bring the opacity down to about, say, 20, and then I'll just lighten certain parts of the lips. And you notice I'm not doing it across the entire lips. I'm putting it within those areas inside of those lines where you would normally see highlights. And I'll throw a little highlight right through here where it's just a little lightening of the lips like so, and then maybe a little highlight there. And once all those tones are in to that bottom lip, I would then select this whole side, and I'm going real close along the edge, and I'm selecting the whole side of the lip right here. I make sure the transparency isn't locked, and I'll go in there and blur that. We'll give it a Gaussian blur, and we're just going to soften that edge, just like we see at the bottom of our lips, unless there's really strong lipstick on there. There isn't a hard edge at the bottom of the lip, so I'm just going to soften it up just a little right in there. Click OK, deselect it, and there you can see that we have a really nice looking kind of a lip. Which at any time you can go in there and darken more areas if you want. So I can go in here and let's say I want some darker tones. I'm going to switch this over to my highlights, which is going to go in there and add a darker tone to these areas. I'm going in there and just darkening. And that little smudge there, no problem. I could go in there and just give it a little pull. Just with the smudge tool, I just pushed it up underneath that lip there. So I'm going in there and I want some harder areas, some brighter areas. So I switch this over to shadows and I'll just add a little tones right here to the lips. And you can see that here I'm almost like saturating certain parts of the lips to add a little more texture, a little more sheen to them. And there you can see that we have this really nice looking lip. The upper lip is usually much darker. So what I'm going to do is switch back to highlights and kind of just darken this lip up here. Just darken the whole thing like that. Go to my midtones. So I'm going to get some nice reds and start adding some texture. I'm going to darken this side because this is going into the shadow. I'm going to darken real close to the opening of the mouth like that. And then make a really small brush and add a couple of little lines just like we did in the lower lip. And lock its transparency and again form those lines just the way we want. Just kind of push them back and forth to kind of get the right angles that we want, just like that. And we can add a little highlight to those if we want. So we'll just add a little highlight to the lip right there and there. And like we did with the bottom lip, I'm going to select the top portion of the lip, and sometimes it helps to have a little bit of a feather. An 8 is going to work pretty well with this resolution, so I'm going to go along the top of the lip as I did with the bottom. I'm going to kind of end it about there, come around and blur that as we did to the bottom lip. Give it a little blur just to soften that. Why isn't it working? Because it's still locked. Let's check that off. Go in there and get that Gaussian blur and soften the top of that lip just a little. Click OK, and there we see that we have our lips.